The purpose of this presentation is really just simply how do you use data that you currently have access to improve your member communications. Our call to action on this is we're going to use a tool called the PESO model, which is going to help us determine how to use those data analytics and then incorporate that into building a stronger and more effective membership campaign. The PESO model, which is what we're going to use as our primary source of discussion, is something that we use with our clients, and PESO stands for Paid, Earned, Social, Owned Content. Today, though, we're going to specifically focus on owned and earned. And the reason why the PESO model for us has become such an intricate part of our dealing with clients is because this is really how public relations is transforming. Now, I'm going to back up about 20 years ago when I started my, actually it was longer, 25 years ago when I was first hired by a large agency here in St. Louis that brought me actually from DC to St. Louis. And I remember we would send out a news release, and if it was picked up, then we counted clips, and then we would take a clip book back to the client and say, oh, look, we have all of these great placements, but we could never necessarily quantify how that helped the client make money, drive revenue, attract members, attract sponsors, etc. So how public relations has morphed under the marketing umbrella is simply this. We are intricate when I say we, communicators are intricate in the messaging of marketing and sales, and they're all merging together now. The PESO model is something that has helped us better quantify how our messaging can help individuals, associations, and organizations grow. This is the PESO model, and I know it looks really busy. It isn't, though, once you start looking at all the intricate items. The PESO model was founded by Dietrich, who's a thought leader in the PR industry, and we're fortunate enough to actually have her as one of our business coaches. So she's guiding us through how we can help our clients grow through this whole list of items. PESO, though, for our discussion purposes today, I just want to take your eyes to earned media and owned media. And the reason why we're going to focus on those two areas right now is that's what your organization currently owns, currently has immediate access to, and it's what you're doing quite often. We're going to take a quick look at paid and shared media before we jump into owned and earned, just so that you have a well-rounded idea of what it is. And the other way that I want you to think about the PESO model when it comes in terms of content is simply this. Owned media is what we create. Shared media or social media is what we distribute. Paid media is how we amplify the content, how we get notice of it. And earned media is how you earn credibility for yourself as a source or credibility for your association. So really, you cannot have owned media without paid media, which is increasing the reach, earned media, which is increasing the awareness, and shared media, which is increasing the distribution. And there's Jenny, the PESO model. So shared media, as I just referenced, is really the social media. Social media, it was interesting. Looking back 12 years ago when Ed and I started this company, I remember we were some of the earlier adapters of social media. And at that time, it was just, how do you set up a Facebook page and use that to engage your potential and current clients or members? Or how do you set up a LinkedIn profile? Oh boy, 12 years has gone by fast. In fact, it's light years, but the way that social media now is in every format of what we do, and from our daily behaviors to how we get our information to communicating with friends and family to just conducting our business. So social media has grown to the point where it really is the primary source of distribution of information to our internal teams and externally to our members, clients, customers. It's also a way to build partnerships, community and promote campaigns. So what I mean by building community, in that sense, it's really gathering individuals and other partners who want to be part of your discussion, who want to know more about your association and what groups you represent, what topics you represent, how you can be a source of information, etc. Community, again, your sense of community here in St. Louis, and just promoting campaigns among members, sponsors, potential members. Paid media, on the other hand, is exactly that, what we pay for. And I think sometimes we get tripped up on the idea of advertising and how it needs to be expensive. In many cases, your online advertising does not have to be expensive. You can actually run very successful campaigns for as little as $5 a day on Facebook, given what your keyword searches are. Or if you are interested in running a campaign on LinkedIn, a lot of the time LinkedIn will offer free coupons for organizations who haven't advertised before. And you could start a campaign slowly and on a smaller scale using something to that effect. Sponsored content is an interesting item because a lot of the time we don't realize that we're reading sponsored content that could also look like an article. So, you know, one example would be in local print publications, you'll see articles next to one another. But if you look very carefully, you'll sometimes see an article that will say paid for by or sponsored by. And the reason why sponsored content has actually risen in popularity over the last couple of years is it just blends in well with the given medium that the individual is reading, listening to, or viewing. And then there's email marketing, which many of us are familiar with, but for the discussion of the paid side, this is really about permission-based marketing. Your organization pushes out content through email. You want an email address or contact information, phone address, etc. But the only way that you can collect that information is if someone gives you permission to contact them through an email campaign. And usually that means that your organization is offering something that can either be downloaded, it's either a white paper or maybe an infographic of a particular topic, or even a video that could explain something. So to develop an ongoing campaign with earned media and owned media is really where we're going to focus today. And as mentioned earlier, this is content that you already own in your organization. And when I'm using the word content, I'm using a broader scope of it, but just think about everything, and this is pretty broad, but again, for the intent of this discussion, that's where I want us to go, is just start thinking about everything that you have within your marketing, within your policy, within your individual discussions, member recruitment, content that can be used. So let's begin with that idea. What is it that you own? Well, when you look at what you own, oftentimes clients will come to us and say, oh, we have to create this, we have to create Y, we have to create Z, et cetera, et cetera. And there is some truth to that, but I often will ask clients to take a step back and think about, are we creating new content right now, or are we going to refresh content that's already been created? And then from that, then you can begin creating new content, because you want to understand what message are you trying to communicate with your current and potential members and even sponsors. And let's start thinking about adding sponsors to our recruitment of groups that we want to make sure that our content is reaching, just because that's another component of revenue for associations. But going back to what do we have? Let's look at that. How do we repurpose existing content? Well, I think a lot of the time, much of the content that we create is actually very lively for a couple of years. Evergreen used to be the corporate term that I would use, but now I'm looking at content that is still relevant within a 2 to 3 year time frame. Now, right now, a lot of content that's been produced by so many organizations is the COVID-19 rules adapting, how you interact, etc. And that's going to be around for quite a while. And I would say that within the next year, the COVID-19 content that you've already created for your organization to communicate with members, sponsors, etc., will be relevant in a year, but you'll probably want to go back and revisit it, because when you start having your membership meetings in person, even though we know we need to socially distance, there may be a lot of new information available on how that looks. But that's just one idea. But it's really, kind of looking at your communications audit. The other thing too is, what do your members want? And that is an ongoing struggle with understanding how to create content that's relevant for, especially for associations and not-for-profits, in understanding what members want. And we have, it's pretty common for associations to send out surveys, and that's great. The biggest challenge I think that associations have, as do all organizations, is how do you prioritize, and how do you take that information from the association survey or the membership survey and tie that back into better programming, better services, better content provided, etc. Because I think what happens is we just get busy then in the day-to-day management. So I would say that after you've conducted your own audit of your existing content, then go back and look at what your members wanted, because that's really going to be the foundation of any new content that is created. One idea that I would recommend for surveys is have almost like a state of the state. And this is an idea that we can carry through at the end of the discussion, but just make note of this. With your membership surveys, do any of you have what I like to call the state of the association? Similar to maybe the state of the union, state of the state, state of the city, where you start with where you were 1 year ago and you benchmark progress that had been made maybe in certain areas of that survey. And then and then when you're ready to start the next survey or the next association year, you can go back and just reflect on where you've improved. And even though this, the speech really needs to be forward-looking, you can spend a few minutes in discussing what had been accomplished and then what members want, and then look forward. And you could do that with a grade card, graphic, or an infographic, etc. The other area where you can really just help yourself and your team, especially the marketing team, if they're not already doing this, is to create an editorial calendar for content. And this would include everything that your association currently uses in the world of social media. And you can even do this for your own individual LinkedIn page if you choose. But an editorial calendar is something that Ed and I live by, and we also work with clients on this. And you could plan a year out, but as we all know right now, planning a year out seems so long. So I would recommend just quarterly editorial calendars where you put down content that you plan on sharing or writing a blog about, or having an Instagram quick video, or posting on Facebook or Twitter, topics that would be relevant given that time of day. Because with association annual calendars, there are some items that are very consistent: award deadlines, maybe legislative visits, days on the Hill. You kind of have that built in, but it allows you not to frantically think about, oh, I've got to post this today. What am I going to do? At least you can react and say, I don't like that topic, but you're not going to be lost for words when you're trying to come up with something. So editorial calendars, they're fluid, but if you just put something on paper, it always makes life a little easier. When you look at your owned content now, that's everything that's on your website. And the wonderful thing about owned content is simply this: it's yours. And when you understand that what you own on your website is yours, then the world begins to open with how you can share it with others. When you're looking at content mapping, this is where we start looking at the owned content development process. Content mapping is different from an editorial calendar, though they can be the same. You start with exploring that topic. So with associations, maybe it's with, or let's just take a simple example. I own a bakery, and I am known for great apple pies that I make. So I'm going to look at relevant topics in the apple pie making business. So maybe I'm thinking about the best apples that would make for a great apple pie, or for the paleo dieters out there, how can I make an apple pie that has a crust that would satisfy them, etc. Then you go back into mapping out what those keywords are. Then you look at content that you're trying to focus on with those target audiences. You optimize the pages with your SEO, and you promote the pages, and that's how you really just build a content map. The one secret though, and I just mentioned this with your content, is publish it first on your website. A lot of the time, people don't understand that when it's published first on your website, you own it. If you share it with somebody else first, then oftentimes that's called earned media, but that's also then the content owned by that other website. So if you do end up writing a guest column, or you're interviewed by somebody for a podcast, you have to understand that that content is owned by the other media outlet. And if you do want to post it on your website, you would need to receive permission. You can always create backlinks, but you would have to attribute that piece of content first to the other owner. And that's earned media, which is good, but just for your own understanding. The one thing about content creation that seems overwhelming, but it's really not, and this is going back to what you are doing when you're, what we just talked about. Conduct an audit of what you have existing. I have to think that once you start having that opportunity to look at the big content and then break it down, it's not overwhelming because the pieces do come together. When you look at content from your own standpoint, what we would recommend is taking a topic and then looking at what is existing in either video format, white papers, podcast, illustrations, infographics, etc. And once you start breaking that down into smaller pieces, that can be, those can be items that can be shared in drips in different formats. And I always kind of like to think of how you can take one idea and break it down so that you have an auditory, a visual, and a spoken written word. The next area that we're going to go into is earned media. And this is really media relations is public relations. And for each of you on the call or on this webinar right now, media relations has been something that we understand. It's that third-party endorsement. It's the ability to build credibility. Your national associations, your local associations, your volunteer leadership, your executives within the organization. I'm sure you all have been covered by the local trade or national press, ranging from everything from award ceremonies and the award recipients to maybe a donation given to a local group, to a fundraiser, all the way up to the national news for someone to speak about a current topic that is timely. To begin getting that earned media though, it's really about building relationships with the media. I'm somebody who actually has relationships with media members, but I'm also always looking to build relationships with influencers, bloggers, reporters, producers, podcasters, etc. Because as we know, nothing is forever. You have to constantly look. So if there are media outlets out there, again, all those different formats now, it's not just print, radio, and television anymore, it's online, blogs, YouTube, etc. You want to begin following individuals that you know would be a good source or a good media outlet to cover the topics that your association represents, and also interview the experts within your association. The way you become credible and the way you become a go-to authority in media relations is simply that. You begin building those relationships. And what I like to do is I'll comment on articles, on videos that people that I'm following and I want to build a relationship with my client, I'll just make thoughtful comments and share that with other people within my network. And reporters do watch that. In fact, they greatly appreciate it because a lot of the time they'll write an article and you'll have comments about, hey, do you want to make $3,000 a month? Click on this link. Or they won't receive any comment. Or if they do receive a comment, it could be the extreme opposing view of what they're trying to say. So if you give thoughtful comment, share the article with others within your network through LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, etc., it's greatly appreciated. And then also just telling a compelling story. We all know the idea that if you're going to be an expert on a topic, it's just that. So if you're going to be an expert in Forrest Gump, then you want to make sure that you are able to communicate why Forrest was able to pop up in all these different periods in history, but you can't push your own company and say that I'm the only Forrest Gump expert in the world. And what I mean by that is that people are coming to you because you're a source. Ultimately, you really want to make that reporter, editor, or writer just a wonderful source of information for his or her listeners, viewers, readers, etc. So let's get to the metrics that really matter when it comes to owned media and earned media. Like I said, your website is the first place to go because you own it. We're going to look at the vanity metrics. So Google Analytics really is this huge repository in some ways of just information. You can slice and dice and go down into the rabbit holes, etc. And the vanity metrics, as they're known, really do matter, but it's just the tip of the iceberg. And when I refer to vanity metrics, I'm really looking at things such as new or unique visitors to your website, time spent on the website, meaning when somebody comes to your website, are they looking at one page and leaving, or are they going to multiple pages? What is the bounce rate, etc. But just understanding these is a good beginning, but it's not enough. The second area is just to have an email marketing campaign that will also allow you to track who's opening your emails, who's downloading your information, who's sharing your information. Because really what you want to understand is, it's a twofold effort. Number one, are you putting out compelling content that causes somebody to say, I want to learn more? Are they sharing their information with you where you can actually have that permission-based marketing? And three, are the people who are sharing your content, opening your content, then some of your best individuals to send out that information to others who could be potential members or potential sponsors? And that's where you get into community engagement. It's the sharing of the content. I would rather have 10 people who are enthusiastic about my content and helping me recruit members, recruit sponsors, get our name out there, versus having 100 people in my community, but no one ever responds, or you might get one like every once in a while on Facebook. For the earned media to track your metrics, you really want to look at increased web traffic. How many, and again, I'll pose this question, how many of you have ever had a placement, say, with Fox 2 News, and then you then go to your Google Analytics after the story airs, and you see how many increases of individuals who have visited your website, or even your own LinkedIn profile. That is one thing, it's kind of fun to do, but at the same time, it's necessary because you want to make sure that the media placements you're receiving aren't just once and done, but how can you repackage them? And you repackage those by, again, sending out smaller items, smaller content that would allow you to connect that with a story down the road. Earned media also provides you with the opportunity to have increased domain authority. And domain authority is also, referred to as like the thought leadership of your website on the web. And what that means is when people are searching for content or to have a question answered, let's go back to the apple pie example. They're looking for who makes the best apple pie in the world. And if your website has enough earned media placements and enough search words that will allow you to rank high domain authority over other websites, that's really good because Google rewards those websites that have higher domain authorities based on fresh content that isn't just content that only you produce, but is also linked to other third-party groups. And it also just helps with your whole SEO. SEO, again, is not once and done. Google likes to switch things up quite often. So your SEO, the words that and phrases that your association web copy currently has are good, but again, they just need to be tested constantly. And having web content, or rather media placements that would actually satisfy and use the SEO words that you have is a good way to begin. So in closing, I'd like to challenge us with a quick exercise, and I'm not sure if this is something that each of you have tried, but it's something that I think if you haven't tried, it would at least be a good exercise to begin to understand who is opening your next newsletter, what medium is used or is used most frequently among your membership, and how you can switch it up to help increase content, push it out so people can share it with others. In this exercise, what I'd like for you to do is think about content. What's in it for me? What is the focus of this content, and how is it going to make the member's life better? How is your association going to be able to come up with this content in the next newsletter that's going to make the member, the receiver, more interested in what you do? And I know that that's a constant, but it's also something that allows us to continuously challenge ourselves. So I'm going to open up with a website, and this is where I, you know what, I'm going to open up this website after I'm done. All right, so quick aside there. But what I want you to do is for your next newsletter, I want you to create a unique URL that with a specific word or phrase to help measure the effectiveness of the marketing campaign or of the newsletter that you're using. And if you go to Google and you type in URL Builder, it will take you to a link called Campaign URL Builder - Google Analytics Demos and Tools. And again, this is the website I'll show you here in a moment. And you'll see that there are 4 boxes to complete. The third box is the medium that you're going to use, where you can either put in email, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, e-newsletter, etc. And now by having that unique URL for each of these different mediums delivered, you'd have to create one for each source that you want to use to distribute the newsletter. It will give you an opportunity to go into Google Analytics and see who opened it, which was the most popular, and which was the most shared. So let me provide my summary, and then we'll go to that website. So in summary, PESO is simply this: paid, earned, social, owned. For association executives, focus on the owned and earned because you already have that. Owned, always remember, post your own content first on your website. Use Google Analytics as your starting point. Constantly think about content as engaging members to help recruit and retain members and sponsors. Earned media is what you see on television, print, radio, podcast, blogs, YouTube, Twitter, and every other area that you can think of. But again, it always goes back to the messaging, making sure that it's consistent, and measuring our communications to help engage members to see what they are reading, what isn't of interest to them, is just the beginning in helping all of you think about, as you're putting content out, make sure that, yes, you do want to highlight what the association has done for the members, but you also want to make sure that the members know that you're there on their behalf, and the content that is being created and generated is for them, because they have helped drive that. So I'm going to go to this website, but I'm open for questions now. Thank you. Share screen.
So Anne-Marie, this is Susan with SLSAE. I'm going to read you a couple of the questions that we have,
Okay,
if you're ready.
I am.
So question one, referring back to when you talked about the content, reusing content from previous years.
Yes.
Do we need to reference that it is a reprint is the question.
Reprint in terms of reprint
Like
something
reusing
from,
the material.
I'm sorry, what?
Reusing the material from previous year, do you need to reference that it's a reuse?
You know, I think what happens is if we're looking at earned media, you will want to reference that this appeared in the St. Louis Business Journal on January 1st, 2019. And you can even have a link to that content or a link to that article. The challenge that we do see though with a lot of earned media content now, especially on the print side, is that you have to actually be a paid subscriber many times to access that information. So you would probably you would most likely need to approach or contact the media outlet and ask them how you can link content, say that was a couple years old, because a lot of the time what I'm finding is the paid subscription, they just want to guard it for a short period of time for newer content, but for older content, they usually do make that available. Now, for some content like the Small Business Monthly, they have a PDF of the actual publication, but it's only live for 1 month. So and it's not searchable by Google because there's like a wall that prevents it from being searched because of the PDF. So you would want to work with them and it might just be a scanned article. You know, they do have a lot of links to previous articles, especially the award winners, but for the more lengthy articles, they don't make that as readily available. Does that answer your question?
So yes.
Okay.
Second question, how appropriate or acceptable are holiday postings such as 4th of July, Juneteenth, Labor Day? Is that something you can use on professional organizations, websites, and social media, or is that more to be avoided?
No. Well, couple of answers to that question. Okay. The first one is each organization, if you don't have it, and you're all members of larger associations, so this is probably something you already have, but branding guidelines. And it's more than just knowing what the color of your logo is and, you know, what the size logo that should be used on marketing materials. Branding guidelines also encompass what can be shared in terms of national holidays, local holidays, etc. My own professional opinion is I think it's fine to wish others Happy New Year, Happy Labor Day, Happy Memorial Day, because those are national holidays. I also think though that we've gone through a really interesting change in the landscape of our country over the last 4 to 5 months, not just with COVID-19, but also with Black Lives Matter and the discussion now being shared in corporate America and also with families, et cetera, where some of the more sensitive issues are now being discussed. And it's not to say that you want to hide from that. I'm not saying that at all, but I think you need to have a very clear understanding of how your organization wants to approach those topics. And I think it really just comes down to a discussion. And what I mean by that is, Sue, you had mentioned Juneteenth. And I'll be the first to say that Juneteenth was something I had heard of over the years, but I didn't really understand what it was or the true significance of it. And I'm still learning about that. So I think national holidays are fine, but once you start getting into some of these more newer type holidays that we're all learning about, that needs to be a discussion with your board or at least with your group that really understands the branding guidelines.
Excellent, thank you. We have 2 more right now. As you indicated, Google Analytics has an abundance of information that is challenging to digest. What
Yes.
should someone use as a starting point and basis point to work from?
That's a really good question. And um, I think really, and I had mentioned this in terms of just very tip of the iceberg. And I'm going to say that I'm somebody who is also learning through this process as well. And even though I haven't dug too deep, I'm starting to dig deeper. But I'm also realizing that I can get lost in, oh, well, there's a person from China that just clicked on my website. How interesting is that? But that has nothing to do with my the point. I think what I would do is start with the primary information of one, unique visitors. And yes, the person located in China might be a unique visitor, but I would probably be more focused on the unique visitors in Missouri or in St. Louis, or if you had a program in St. Charles, maybe you had an uptick of individuals from the St. Charles County region. But I would look at unique visitors. I would also look at your rate, your bounce rate, and your rate of how long people are spending on your page. And what that means is it really just goes back to how compelling is your content, and are people staying on your website but switching pages. And even if they stay on your page just for 1 minute, that could be a page that may not be your landing page, or rather your main page. It could be a page that deals with a specific topic. So if, going back to our apple pie baking description, maybe you were the one apple pie baking company in the country that has the best paleo diet apple pie recipe out there, and that seems to be the one that's very popular. So you want to look at those type of statistics and see who's visiting what pages and what tends to be the most popular. That's where I would begin with the primary.
And you may have already answered this. This is a continuation of that question. Is there a location in Google or elsewhere to help digest the data?
You know, that is a good question. And as I shared earlier, when Sue and we were all getting ready, I've got my handy pad of paper and pen. I'm going to look at that and I'll respond to Sue with that. But I think right now, Google Analytics, and again, I'm studying this, I'm going through a certification process right now this summer. And what I'm finding is Google is so rich, not just with articles, but there are so many videos. And those videos can also be taken over into the YouTube world. And it's overwhelming. So what I'd like to do is offer some of the videos that I find to be most useful for myself, because my learning process tends to be more of a, I read. That's how I retain things best. But so many people are auditory, so many people are visual. So I'd like to share with you, maybe in the next day or so, to answer your question completely from my perspective, what I have found to be most beneficial. Because for me, data is something that I've always kind of shied away from up until like the last couple of years, only because I have to prove my worth and value to clients by showing that this message helped drive this sale, or this message helped find this potential client. Is that fair?
Thank you.
Okay.
So I have one last question.
Yes.
When breaking an idea down and using it to market in social media, is there a rule to how many times a week you can post about the same type of topic? Do you need, and then a little further, do you need to have different graphics each time you post, or is the same graphic recommended?
Okay, I'm going to sound like an attorney, and I'm not one, but I've worked with enough attorneys over the years. And I'm going to say it just depends. And what I mean, and what I mean by that is, you know, Hootsuite, and that's spelled HOOTESUITE. So we've used it for one of your clients.
I know.
Before. And Hootsuite is a way of populating. It's an app. It's a platform that allows you to post content in advance, so you don't have to worry about it, and you do it at certain times of the day. I would say that I don't think it's bad to post content multiple times throughout a week or 2 week period. What I would encourage you, though, is to think about, if you posted it, say at 7 a.m. on a Tuesday, maybe you want to move it to 2 p.m. on a Wednesday. And you could also take that same content and not just limit it to Facebook, with the assumption that, with the understanding rather, that you need to really figure out, where does your membership get most of their information? As we've learned with associations that we've worked with in the past, their members, even though they're all of different ages, Facebook tends to be the most popular. Or we have one association where they have members that really gravitate in that 45 and above and 35 and below, and they're looking at Instagram and Facebook. Then we have other associations that don't mess with any of it, and they only go with LinkedIn. So before you start populating the different platforms, I would ask you to really just think about where you will get the biggest bang for your buck and your time, and where can you reach the greatest amount of members based on how they want to receive their information.